Welcome! I'm Ann McCullum, the first female chair of the Board of Trustees in PAFA's 216-year history, and I'm proud to invite you into Taking Space, Contemporary Women Artists and the Politics of Scale. I want to thank Jody Throckmorton, our Curator of Contemporary Art, and Brittany Webb, the Evelyn and Will Kaplan Curator of 20th Century Art, along with our many friends and supporters who have helped make possible this provocative exhibition, exploring how women claim space in the art world. Come see how PAFA's unflagging commitment to collecting work by women artists is challenging and changing art history. Join us.
Taking Space, Contemporary Women Artists and the Politics of Scale is a show that's about so many themes: self-portraiture, seriality, and so it's nice to really open up in this section that begins with artist self-portraiture and work that is figurative or in some way about the body, even in some unexpected ways.
Yeah, we really wanted people to enter the exhibition and be confronted with these self-portraits of female artists, as well as other figurative work that deals with the female body, for example.
And so for that reason, it made perfect sense to open with this wall that has this work by Deborah Willis, Joan Brown, and then Jadeka Akunyili Crosby. Deb Willis's I Made Space for a Good Man is this piece that is based on self-portrait photography she took in the 1970s. And it's inspired by this experience she had as a young art student being told by a male professor that it was a shame that she was in his class because she was taking up a good man's space. And of course, in the image, she reclaims that story that really truncates her ability to think about her future in the world. She was a female student, that she made space for a good man by giving birth to the artist Hank Willis Thomas. She's a photographer, a curator. So this is a really great piece to start off the show with, to think about women artists making work both about their lives, but also for future generations of other artists.
And the Joan Brown self-portrait from 1977 builds on that Deb Willis piece, in that it is a self-portrait of Joan Brown, but it's her parody of what people think a female artist does. So the idea of a female artist making art as a hobby, for example. So you'll see that she's in a 1950s housewife's kind of dress with high heels on, a dainty brush, and painting a beautiful flower still life, which, as far as I know, Joan Brown never painted. But if you look at the bottom of the painting, you'll see that it's a complete mess of brushstrokes and paint all over the floor. So you get an idea of how she was actually working, the physicality of what she was doing with paint. And also a reference, I think, to scale, which is something that comes up again and again in this exhibition. The idea that women were painting largely as a way to assert their presence in the art world.
In this section on figurative portraiture, we have this incredible work by Clarity Haynes, who is a PAFA alumna, and it's this piece, Janie, from her Breast Portrait series.
And you immediately confront the portrait or maybe the portrait confronts you when you come into the exhibition. And it's an incredibly important image because it's of an incredibly important person named Janie. Janie was an important activist. She did a lot of work around bodies and thinking about what bodies do we see and are accepted in mass media, even in museums, which is something that we think a lot about. Why is it okay to see an idealized female body? But this incredibly beautiful portrait that you see of Janie, for example, those aren't the images that you're seeing in popular culture or frankly in museums often. So that's something that Janie did in her real life. She sadly passed away a few years ago, but that Clarity's very much pushing forward with her work and taking space in that way.
So this section is on the environment, both the natural environment and the built environment, and the way the works play off of each other is really beautiful. You have work by Ana Mendieta and Anna Vizcarra Rankin that are both dealing with the space of the physical geography of the earth. And that's in conversation with this lovely piece by Winifred Lutz that uses light and throws light against the Ellen Harvey, which is also this physical installation that viewers are meant to interact with.
The piece is 4 hand-etched, very large-scale mirrors, and they're hand-etched with images of the historic landmark building, which is PAFA's building that was built in 1876, and really perhaps the image that PAFA is known for. But Ellen Harvey did not recreate this architectural scape in its entirety. It's in the middle of destruction. There are vines and weeds growing up from the walls. It's crumbling down. So it's a bit of an institutional critique of museums, and I think now we look on it with a little bit of a decolonial lens as well. But it's an incredibly beautiful piece when you walk in and you realize that you are reflected. It's one of the largest installations in the exhibition, and the viewer walks into the space, is reflected in the panels, and is really not only part of the piece, but starts to take space like the work does in the exhibition.
So this next section in Taking Space is the piece by Bree Rouet, which is both environmental, it uses space as a medium, but it's also in some ways about the body.
Rouet's work responds to the traditions of land art and ceramic art in the United States, which have been primarily male-dominated since the 60s and 70s and really before. But what she does is she begins with her body weight in clay. So I believe for stripped away, it's 135 pounds. She stands in the middle of that mound of clay and pulls and scrapes and pushes really to the physical limits of her body, both as an endurance performance, but also the scope of the length of her arms and her legs. And she goes until she can't go anymore. And the result is an incredibly beautiful, almost primordial structure of clay that she then fires and glazes.
So in this section where we move into work that is about the built environment in terms of domesticity and interior space, we have this great piece, this triptych from Tammy Ray Carlin's Lesbian Bed series. And it's also a nice moment in the exhibition where we're getting into some photography. And what's really lovely about that work is that the title signals that you're in an interior space, a home space, a private space. And it's work about the body that doesn't feature any bodies at all.
As you move through that space, we start transitioning into a section that's about pattern and decoration. It's about material, and it's thinking through how during the women's art movement, a lot of women were using materials actually often associated with the domestic. So thinking about quilting, for example, or using bits and pieces from fabrics, for example. So Miriam Shapiro is really the leader of that movement in the 70s, and we have an incredibly beautiful piece by her called Renewal that brings together all sorts of different fabrics in a collage form, which she coined the term femage for. Adjacent to the Miriam Shapiro piece is a later piece by Wangechi Mutu, which is a collage composed of magazine imagery, lace, beads. It's shiny and beautiful, but also as you look closer, there's an incredible story. It's a myth about a woman's sort of destruction and that life cycle of a female. And as you turn the corner, you're really drawn in by Marie Watt's beautiful piece that's composed of found quilts and fabric. This is a section that really, again, deals with the pattern and decoration movement, but also thinking about how women have throughout history used quilts and fabric in their work, but also incredibly colorful pieces, which is another element to this exhibition. Watt's piece is in honor of the Iroquois Skywalkers. They were invited out or brought out to New York City to build skyscrapers because they could stand on these incredibly large steel beams up in the sky without using harnesses. So while Marie Watt was living in Brooklyn, she discovered this story, which again is a hidden history that most of us, I wasn't aware of, frankly, until I got to know this work, and started thinking about ways to honor them and to make work about them. And of course, the blankets have a difficult history. As much as we talk about them being used by women in art, and certainly they have a comforting and nurturing aspect to them, there's also, you know, the moment when settler colonials gave blankets and gave disease to the native people living in this country. So there's a long history tied to that material, especially for Marie Watt, in relation to her heritage.
And what's nice about the Marie Watt in this section is that it's also right next to this incredible Faith Ringgold quilt. And so again, we're seeing this work where women are making artists with materials, with fabric. It's also about sort of dreaming from a New York City rooftop. And so you have this great conversation about architecture in the city of New York, but through these materials that are sort of unexpected because they're blankets.
There's an incredibly beautiful and very large-scale woodcut by Polly Apfelbaum called There Are Many Hearts in the exhibition. And it's really, Apfelbaum was pulling on her heritage growing up in the Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia area, and thinking about all the Fraktur, all the German folk art that her family had in their family home growing up. So you'd see those hearts on quilts, you'd see them on barn stars, for example. And so she decided to make a really magnificent and large woodcut print at Durham Press to talk about this heritage. And it's an incredibly joyful piece, I think, as well.
And so now we come into this section, which again, we're confronted with portraiture, with figurative portraiture. But here in this section, many of the artists are dealing so much with history as a theme in their work. Deborah Priestley's piece, which features these many, many portraits of soldiers who served in World War I, is based on this panorama portrait from her family history. It's her great uncle. And it features an African-American regiment that served in World War I. And she takes this panorama picture that she inherits and decides to make miniature portraits of each of the men in the image. And so it's a piece that's really a meditation both on the history of portraiture and who we see in art history, but also a way of reclaiming family history and the history of the nation in this work that is about making sure that each figure that served in this unit gets their own individual homage.
The piece next to it is a watercolor by Elizabeth Colomba, and I want to point out that in this section the work is all really technically accomplished. Deborah Priestley's drawings are incredibly beautiful, and Elizabeth Colomba's writing places is a very large-scale watercolor. So when you look closely at it, you realize, I mean, watercolor is a very difficult medium to work with, so this is an accomplished painter, first of all. But more importantly, conceptually, the piece really thinks about the history of portraiture and the history of art, whose bodies have been included and whose have been excluded, and also how those bodies have been shown in the history of art. So she takes this Black woman's body and is making a very powerful assertion. She's staring right at you. There is a galloping pony, not galloping, I think he's just rearing, pony, that's a very strong figure, and she's got tight hold of those reins. And so thinking about the Black body in that position, but also it's part of a larger series where she's thinking about the Black body at leisure. It's a perfect complement because across the way, Elizabeth Colomba's figures looking at Mickalene Thomas's, one of her extraordinary portraits with rhinestones and beading and wood paneling even in this piece. Thomas is, of course, thinking about the history of portraiture in the United States and how, well, history of the portraiture in the world, really, and how women have and have not been shown, and how they can reclaim their power through these mediums that are often associated with the patriarchy. Taking Space begins and ends with a really extraordinary installation by Ebony G. Patterson. It really takes over the entire space because even when you're in other parts of the exhibition, you can see the reflection of the pink with white polka dotted fabrics coming throughout the entire exhibition.
And it's from this larger series, but it is a single installation piece called Doing What They Always Do. And, you know, from afar, you get this great look at the piece, which is fabric-based, textile-based, and has this incredible surface that's adorned with beads, with brooches, with toys, and sort of all of these materials that you find elsewhere in the exhibition, but are really meant to sort of signal a kind of cherubic, childlike joy. And then when you get very close to the image, you realize that the textiles have these images of Black children that are sort of punctured, that you have these holes through. And she's really thinking about the ways that Black youth have their childhood cut short as a function of race. But to do it in this way, where you have this medium that is really about sort of joy and light, the piece is really double-sided in ways that are really productive and interesting.
So when we first started talking about this exhibition and really looking at PAFA's permanent collection, because everything in the exhibition is in PAFA's permanent collection, we started looking at the group of women abstract expressionists that we have in the collection at PAFA. And so someone like Lee Krasner, for example, we have a beautiful example of her work that's in the exhibition. So originally it all started there, and from there it leaped all the way to Ebony G. Patterson and Deani Whitehawk and artists that, you know, were made their work in 2020, for example. But thinking about how, you know, the male abstract expressionists were often painting quite big. There's words like action painting thrown about, and it's a very physical painting style, often sort of characterized that way, and how the women artists of the abstract expressionist movement were doing the same. but also how there was a transition in the 60s and 70s where they started making work about the figure, oftentimes their own figure, self-portraiture. Or, for example, Audrey Flack, who's also in the exhibition, she was one of the first and few female photorealists, and we have an amazing example of one of her early still life works in the exhibition called World War II Vanitas. It's an incredibly personally important painting to Flack. It's about her Jewish heritage and the Holocaust, but it's also one of those paintings that you see in the art history books.
And what's nice is that again, you have this mid to late century period where women artists are drawing on abstract expressionism, working large, but also working political. One of the things that we love about the Judy Gellis photo series that we have on view is that this is her first series as a young artist where she starts to make work about her life. And so you really see the humor in a piece like Bathroom, where she's a young artist, a young mother who would really just love to be able to go to the bathroom alone. And in this image, you have her young son sort of climbing all over her while she's just trying to use the bathroom. And there's a way that the politics of that work feels very now in this moment where so many of us are trying to figure out how to make work in our homes, trying to figure out the politics of workspace and home space, and to think about women artists making work in the mid-century in that way with just a touch of humor is really nice in this exhibition. And so thinking about being in conversation with art history and pushing against art history, it's really nice to have the Guerrilla Girls on view in the School of Fine Arts Gallery as you move into Tuttleman. Just as a prompt to think about how women artists show up in art history or fall out of art history in mainstream spaces like college curriculum or in your textbooks. And so it's really nice when you move into the sculpture gallery to have these sculptures anchored by work by a figure like Louise Nevelson. And we have two great examples on view in this exhibition from the permanent collection. And she really is a kind of grande dame of mid-century sculpture for so many artists who talk about her as a major inspiration. And we have these large-scale wood pieces, South Floral and Cascades Perpendiculars. And it's a really nice example of the architectural impulse in her sculptural practice.
And sculpture's still a very politically contested area for women, or medium for women, I think. When you look at the cities around you, the sculptures that are made, the public art is made by men, primarily white men. So it's incredibly important for us to give major sculpture opportunities to women, and Alison Schatz and her plain weave sculpture is an excellent example of that. We commissioned Alison to make this sculpture in 2015 in our historic landmark building. She was very much thinking about the natural light that infuses that entire space, but we've also been able to install it in the Hamilton building, I think in another lovely place where it catches the light at different times of day. So it's a piece that really rewards you as you come back again and again. But part of what she was thinking about is that this is an aluminum sculpture. It's technically very heavy, but when you look at it, it looks beautiful and light and curving, and it's not what you think of when you think of those big sort of macho steel sculptures that you see out in the cities, for example. And it's also, tying back to a major section in the show, and part of our thinking about materials is that she does call it a plain weave. So these are aluminum pieces that she's designed and then hand woven, actually with the help of PAFA students, into these tapestries that she's then hung from the ceiling. Taking Space is an exhibition that really needs to be seen in person. You can't possibly get the scale and the feel of these pieces over your screen. So we really invite you to come visit. We're quite proud that all of these works are in our permanent collection, over 60 artists. But with that, we acknowledge that there's a lot more work for PAFA to do, and there's a lot more work for museums across the world to do in terms of bringing women artists into their collections.
And this is such a beautiful show of an intergenerational group of artists who have thanked us, some of them for being on view with some of their heroes. And so we invite you to come and enjoy the ways that we have really staged this lovely art historical conversation where you can appreciate both the intellectual importance and just the general beauty of the way these artists are taking this space.